passage is Mark 1:29 to 31. Immediately after leaving the synagogue, Jesus and his disciples entered Simon and Andrew's house with James and John. Simon's mother-in-law lay ill with a fever, and immediately they told Jesus about her. Jesus went over to her, took her by the hand, and helped her up, and the fever left her. Then she went about her work. Makes me think he got healed so she could go about her work and serve a meal.
The sun was out, the skies were blue, a couple white fluffy clouds. George and I were taking a hike in Vermont. It was a beautiful day, but somehow we missed a marker. We went over the ridge and continued our hike. And then as the day passed, the sun began to early set. And we followed the markers that we had found, thinking we'd find our way back to the lodge where we had checked in. A little confused, we pulled out one of our iPhones and pulled up a map, and sure enough, the trail was marked leading down to a road, which we knew that could take us back. The challenge is, not only was it getting dark, the trail was somewhat unkempt. It hadn't been trimmed back. There were some interesting footprints in the mud. Bear. But we continued for a while. But finally, we decided that perhaps we should trek back a bit because it was really getting dark and we really had no idea where we were. So luckily, when we got back to a place, there was a clearing. We had some cell phone access. We called the lodge, tried to explain where we were, telling them that we were at trail marker K, and they said, "We've never heard of it." So we explained where we were and that we were near a ski lift, and they said, "Oh, go up the path along the ski lift, which is quite steep, and come back over the ridge and down, and you'll find us. And please let us know when you get here." To this day, as far as I know, trail marker K in this Vermont region of the country is still unmarked. It was marked on our map, but the trail has lost its use. The state does not even mark it anymore, but somehow we found it and thought we were on the correct path that would lead us back to dinner and safety. But how often do we find ourselves following sign markers or signposts that lead us nowhere? Or we go back to find the old signpost because we like what it stood for. In the reading from 1 Timothy today, it reminded me some of the long journey of civil rights, of segregation, even the part of forbidding marriage, which in our history as a nation where folks who were white and black or other races could not marry, where there are still those in our day who put up or stand on top of signposts to point in a way that the signs do not really point anymore. In the gospel, the woman who is healed, who gets up and works, is almost a passing thought. The reading is quite short, as you heard, and I wonder, there had to be some significance for her to at least show up in Scripture. And perhaps it is that she was to do work once she was healed, but I think it might mean more, that she is one of those silent signposts that stand there, that points a direction to remind us that there is some need. And I think of all those voices in the civil rights movement who we may not even know their names, but they have been those silent signposts that have stood there through history and through time. Even I think of the women's rights movement, of those women who would stand in front of the White House in silence until Congress finally passed for the right for women to vote. Yet these women, in their silence, were arrested and taken to one of the most notorious work prisons in the Washington, D.C. area, and abused, bones broken, for they were standing where soon the next president of the United States would take an oath of office and peddle his platform for women not to have the right to vote. I want to say this is amazing to me that this ever happened, but I know that deep within our lives as a nation and a people, that sometimes we become complicit. We become silent, not as signposts, but we just pass on by. As we think of the work of Martin Luther King Jr., he could only do so much, for I believe there were silent signposts there that supported his work. Some of them were not so silent, but be names that we have heard and forgotten. For I think of people like Howard Thurman, who brought in rich contributions to keep the movement grounded and focused. I think of Miles Horton, who would train up a new generation of activists and loyalists. Martin Luther King needed people like the doctors Kenneth and Mamie Clark, who provided research evidence of the harm caused by segregation, some of the first African Americans to receive a PhD in this country. Martin Luther King needed people like Juliet Hampton Morgan to demonstrate support from white Americans. He needed people like James Baldwin to harness the storytelling to elicit awareness and empathy. All of these activists could influence others in ways beyond that perhaps Dr. King could not do on his own. Together, their efforts affected the heart, mind, and soul as a nation. What do we need now on the eve of an inauguration, on an eve of a new Congress, on the eve of the day that is before us, that will affect our hearts and minds and soul as a people, as a congregation? Who are those silent soundposts now? Perhaps you can think of some in your own lives that will never be mentioned in history, but pointed you in the way. In my own life, I think of the Reverend Earl Rogers, who pushed me to go beyond what I thought church could be, and that I could be a minister and be ordained. I think of folks like Thurletta Brown, who was a choir master at a church I served in seminary, the first African American to work in that church. In a church that at one point in history said if a person of African American descent would come to the front door, they would show the person out the back door. But there, Thurletta played and worshiped and opened a window, a silent soundpost, that things do change. As I think about signposts, I think of street signs. For many cities have Martin Luther King Boulevard, Martin Luther King Drive, and I often wonder when I pass those places, is this a sign just as a memorial? Is this a sign of being PC? Is this a sign pointing anywhere? Sometimes the signs are placed in areas that many do not travel. But I wonder, when we see signs that say Martin Luther King Jr., is it just a marker? Or is it a sign pointing us to a way forward to become a better people, church, and nation?